Lying helpless in my hospital bed, I heard my daughter-in-law whisper, "Turn off her life support, let's go to Paris." My son nodded. They thought I couldn't hear, until I opened my eyes and saw the truth that would change everything. But before I tell you what happened next, I want to pause here. I'm so grateful you're here with me today. If this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. And I'd love to know, tell me in the comments where you're watching my story of revenge from. I want to see how far this tale has traveled around the world. Now, let me take you back to that moment that shattered my world forever. The steady beeping of machines had become the soundtrack to my nightmare. For 2 months, I'd been trapped in darkness, not the peaceful kind you imagine, but a suffocating prison where my mind was fully awake while my body remained still as stone. The doctors called it a coma. I called it hell. The ICU room smelled of antiseptic and false hope. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the sterile walls. Tubes snaked from my arms like lifelines to a world I wasn't sure I wanted to return to. My throat was dry from the ventilator, my muscles ached from disuse, but my ears worked perfectly. That's how I heard them. I'd been drifting in and out of consciousness for days, catching fragments of hushed conversations between nurses, doctors discussing my prognosis, and the occasional visitor who'd whisper prayers they didn't think I could hear. But this voice cut through the medical chaos like a blade through silk. "How much longer do we have to keep coming here?" Destiny's voice was sharp with irritation, not the grief you'd expect from a daughter-in-law watching her husband's mother fight for life. "The doctors said it could be weeks, maybe months more," Desmond replied. My son. My only child. The boy I'd raised with every ounce of love in my broken heart after his father died. I wanted to move, to show them I was there, listening. But my body remained frozen, a prisoner to whatever damage the accident had done. All I could do was lie there and absorb every cruel word. "This is ridiculous, Desmond. She's been like this for 2 months. 2 months of our lives wasted sitting in this depressing place." Destiny's heels clicked against the linoleum floor as she paced. "Do you know what we could be doing with that time? What we could be doing with that money? Money." There it was. The word that would haunt me for the rest of this ordeal. "I know, baby. I know." My son's voice held no sadness, no fear of losing his mother. Only exhaustion. Only inconvenience. "But we have to be careful. We can't look like we don't care." "Well, I don't care," Destiny snapped. "She's never liked me anyway. Always treated me like I wasn't good enough for her precious son." That stung worse than any physical pain I'd endured. Yes, I'd had reservations about Destiny when Desmond first brought her home. But I tried. God knows I'd tried to welcome her, to love her like the daughter I'd never had. "Look at her," Destiny continued, and I could feel her standing closer to my bed now. "She looks terrible. Gray skin, sunken cheeks. This isn't living, Desmond. This is just existing." "The doctor said there's still brain activity," my son replied, but his tone suggested he almost wished there wasn't. "Brain activity doesn't pay for our Paris trip," Destiny said coldly. "Or our credit card debt. Or that house payment we're behind on. Paris. They were planning a vacation while I fought for my life. The irony wasn't lost on me. 2 years ago, I'd used my life savings to pay for their honeymoon to Italy. Now they wanted my death to fund their next romantic getaway. "You know what the life insurance policy is worth," Destiny continued, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a whisper. $500,000. Plus whatever we get for selling this house. We could pay off everything and still have enough left over for a completely new start." My heart monitor's beeping remained steady, but inside my soul was screaming. The house. The home I'd shared with my beloved husband, where I'd raised Desmond, where every corner held memories of love and laughter. They were already planning to sell it. "I've been thinking about it," Desmond said quietly. "Maybe it's time to talk to Dr. Martinez about options." "Options?" What a clinical way to discuss murdering your own mother. You mean like letting her go? Destiny's voice brightened with something that might have been hope. She's suffered enough, Desmond said, and for a moment I almost believed he meant it with compassion. Until he continued, and honestly, so have we. This isn't fair to anyone, especially us. We're young, Destiny. We shouldn't have to put our lives on hold indefinitely. The tears I couldn't shed burned behind my closed eyelids. This wasn't grief talking. This wasn't a son struggling with the impossible decision of when to let his mother rest in peace. This was greed, plain and simple. Calculated. Cold. "Turn off her life support," Destiny whispered, the words dripping with anticipation. "Let's go to Paris. My son, my baby boy, whom I'd rocked to sleep for years, whose scraped knees I'd kissed better, whose college tuition I'd worked double shifts to afford," nodded his agreement. They thought I couldn't hear. They thought I was just a shell, a burden, an obstacle between them and their dreams. But I heard every word. I felt every betrayal. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I thought the accident was the worst thing that could happen to me, lying broken in the street, my body shattered, my future uncertain. But I was wrong. The worst thing was lying in this hospital bed, discovering that my own son was planning my murder. As they continued whispering about doctors and decisions and dollar signs, I made a choice of my own. I wouldn't just fight to live. I would fight to expose the monsters wearing the faces of the family I'd loved unconditionally. But first, I had to survive. And to do that, I had to keep them believing I was helpless. So I lay perfectly still, my breathing steady, my face peaceful, while inside my mind began calculating a revenge that would make their greed cost them everything. The game was about to begin. And they had no idea they were playing against someone who had already lost everything that mattered, except the will to fight back. But to understand how deeply their betrayal cut, you need to know who I was before this hospital bed became my prison. You need to understand the woman who gave everything for a son who now wanted her dead. My name is Kendra Williams, and 2 years ago I was a completely different person. I was a wife, a mother, a woman who believed that love and sacrifice would always be rewarded with love in return. How naive that seems now, lying here with tubes keeping me alive while my son plans my funeral. 2 years ago, my world collapsed when my husband Thomas died. Not from an accident or illness, but from a massive heart attack that took him from me in his sleep. One morning I woke up beside the love of my life, and the next morning I woke up to the devastating silence of an empty bed. Thomas had been my anchor for 25 years, my partner in everything, my best friend and greatest supporter. The grief nearly killed me. There were nights I lay in our bed, clutching his pillow, wondering if I had any reason to keep going. But I did have a reason. I had Desmond, my 28-year-old son who seemed lost without his father too. Thomas had been his hero, his mentor, the man who taught him to drive and throw a baseball and treat women with respect. Or so I thought. After the funeral, Desmond seemed different. Not just grieving, but calculating. While I could barely function through my tears, he was already asking questions about insurance policies and inheritances. The time I told myself he was just trying to help, trying to make sure I would be financially stable. I should have recognized the warning signs. Within 6 months of his father's death, Desmond met Destiny. She was everything I wasn't: young, beautiful, demanding, and expensive. She had champagne tastes and caviar dreams, and somehow my son fell completely under her spell. I watched my grieving boy transform into someone I barely recognized. Gone was the thoughtful, gentle young man his father had raised. In his place stood a man who seemed to measure everything by its price tag. But I loved him. God help me, I loved him with every broken piece of my heart. When he announced he was marrying Destiny after knowing her for only 8 months, I swallowed my concerns and threw them the wedding of her dreams. $20,000 from my life savings went to that fairy tale ceremony. I worked overtime at the insurance office where I'd been employed for 15 years, taking on extra weekend shifts to pay for her designer dress, the country club reception, the honeymoon in Italy. "Mom, you're the best," Desmond had said, hugging me tight after I handed him the check. "Dad would be so proud of how you're taking care of us." I believed him. I wanted to believe him. That hug felt like my old son coming back to me, if only for a moment. But Destiny's appetite for the finer things only grew after their marriage. Designer handbags, expensive dinners, luxury vacations, and somehow it was always my problem to solve. When they couldn't afford the down payment on their dream house, who did they call? When Desmond's business venture failed and they faced bankruptcy, who took out a second mortgage on my home to help them? I became their personal bank, their safety net, their solution to every financial crisis. I worked 60-hour weeks, took on a second job at a department store, sold my jewelry, cashed in my retirement savings, anything to keep them afloat. Thomas's life insurance money, the nest egg we'd planned to use for our golden years together, disappeared bit by bit into their endless needs. "Just until we get back on our feet, Mom," Desmond would say each time. "We'll pay you back with interest, I promise." Promises were as empty as my savings account. But I told myself it was worth it. I told myself that this was what mothers do. We sacrifice for our children. We give until it hurts, and then we give some more. Thomas used to warn me that I spoiled Desmond too much, that I needed to let him face consequences for his choices. I should have listened. The worst part wasn't the money, though. It was watching my son change into someone I didn't recognize. The sweet boy who used to surprise me with handmade Mother's Day cards became a man who only called when he needed something. Family dinners became business meetings where they'd present their latest financial crisis. Holidays became awkward affairs where Destiny would make snide comments about my outdated furniture or small house. I tried to maintain our relationship. I tried to be the mother he needed, the mother-in-law Destiny deserved. I bit my tongue when she criticized my cooking, smiled when she rolled her eyes at my stories, and pretended not to notice when they both seemed bored by my company. 3 months ago, I learned just how little I meant to them. I'd been feeling unwell, dizzy spells, fatigue, occasional chest pains. Worried it might be my heart like Thomas, I called Desmond to ask if he could drive me to the doctor. I was scared, vulnerable, needing my son's support. "Can't you just take an Uber, Mom?" he'd said, irritation clear in his voice. "Destiny and I have plans today, and you know how she gets when we have to cancel." An Uber. To potentially receive devastating medical news. Alone. That day, sitting in that doctor's office by myself, learning that my symptoms were just stress and exhaustion from overworking, I finally understood what I'd become to my son. I wasn't his mother anymore. I was an obligation, a burden, an inconvenience standing between him and his wife's happiness. But did I learn my lesson? Did I finally stand up for myself and demand better treatment? No. 'Cause 2 weeks later, when Desmond mentioned that Destiny was craving those expensive French pastries from the bakery across town, I didn't hesitate to offer to pick them up for their anniversary dinner. It was raining that day, a cold October drizzle that made the streets slick and treacherous. I should have stayed home. I should have told them to get their own pastries. But I thought maybe, just maybe, if I surprised them with this thoughtful gesture, I'd see a glimpse of gratitude. A moment where my son remembered that his mother loved him unconditionally. I remember stepping off the curb, the white bakery box clutched in my hands, thinking about how Destiny's face might actually light up when she saw her favorite treats. I remember the screech of brakes, the moment of terrible clarity when I realized the car wasn't going to stop in time. The last thing I thought before everything went black was, at least the pastries will be okay. Destiny won't be disappointed. I nearly died getting treats for the son who now wants me dead. The irony burns worse than any physical pain I've endured in this hospital bed. But that's who I was, Kendra Williams, the devoted mother who gave everything and asked for nothing in return. The woman who worked herself to exhaustion to fund her son's dreams. The widow who channeled all her grief and love into caring for a child who saw her as nothing more than a wallet with a pulse. Now, lying here listening to them plan my murder, I finally understand the truth. I didn't raise a son. I created a monster. And that monster is about to learn that his loving, sacrificial mother is far from dead. Over the next week, I became a master of deception. Every breath had to be perfectly timed, every muscle completely relaxed, every facial expression neutral as stone. I learned to control my heart rate when the monitors beeped too fast from anger or shock. I became an actress playing the role of my life literally. The hardest part wasn't staying still. It was listening to them destroy every memory I'd held sacred. They visited every other day, always in the afternoon when they thought fewer staff members would be around. Always whispering, always plotting, always calculating the value of my life in dollars and cents. I began to recognize their footsteps in the hallway, Destiny's sharp heels clicking impatiently, Desmond's heavy sneakers shuffling like he was carrying the weight of inconvenience on his shoulders. "How long do we have to keep this up?" Destiny complained during their third visit that week. She was standing by the window, probably checking her reflection in the glass rather than looking at the cityscape. "This place smells like death and disinfectant. It's making me nauseous." "Just a little longer, baby," Desmond replied. I could hear him settling into the vinyl chair beside my bed, the same chair where I used to sit during his childhood hospital visits for broken bones and stomach bugs. Back then, I was the worried parent keeping vigil. Now he was the impatient heir waiting for his inheritance. "I talked to that lawyer again," Destiny said, lowering her voice to what she thought was a whisper. "He confirmed that the life insurance pays out immediately once we have the death certificate. No waiting period, no investigation. $500,000 just like that. Just like that. As if my life was nothing more than a transaction waiting to be processed." "What about the house?" Desmond asked, and I felt a stab of betrayal fresh as the day Thomas and I had signed the mortgage papers 26 years ago. "The real estate agent thinks we can get at least $400,000 for it," Destiny replied with barely contained excitement. "Maybe more if we stage it right. Get rid of all her old furniture and update the kitchen. We could probably clear $350 after expenses." Her old furniture. Couch where Thomas and I had watched movies for decades. The dining table where we'd celebrated every birthday, every holiday, every milestone. The rocking chair where I'd nursed Desmond as a baby, where I'd held him during thunderstorms, where I'd read him bedtime stories until he was old enough to insist he didn't need them anymore. All of it was just old furniture to them. Obstacles to overcome, problems to solve, items to discard so they could maximize their profit. "That's almost $1 million total," Desmond said, and I could hear the greed in his voice like honey dripping from a spoon. "We could pay off all our credit cards, the mortgage, your student loans. We could buy that condo in Miami you've been wanting." Miami. They were planning to take my death money and move to Florida, as far away from the scene of their crime as possible. Smart and calculating, just like the son I'd raised to be responsible. Except I'd raised him to use those skills for good, not for matricide. "Don't forget about Paris first," Destiny reminded him. "I've already been looking at flights. We could leave the day after the funeral. Make it look like we need time to grieve, you know? A romantic getaway to heal from our loss." The day after my funeral, they were planning to celebrate my death with champagne and room service while my body was still fresh in the ground. The thought made my stomach churn, but I kept my breathing steady, my face peaceful. I was getting good at this performance. "My mom always talked about visiting Paris," Desmond said, and for a moment I thought maybe, just maybe, there was still some love left in him. Maybe he was suggesting they honor my memory somehow. She and Dad had planned to go for their 30th anniversary before he died. "Well, now we'll go instead," Destiny laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "At least someone will get to enjoy Paris." She was too old to travel anyway. Can you imagine her trying to walk all those cobblestone streets? She could barely cross a regular street without getting hit by a car. They both laughed. Both of them. Laughing about the accident that had nearly killed me, the accident that happened because I was trying to do something nice for them. Pastry box had been crushed in the impact, the expensive French treats scattered across the wet pavement like my broken dreams of being a good mother. I wanted to scream. I wanted to sit up and slap them both, to demand they show even a shred of human decency. But I stayed still, stayed silent, and let their cruelty wash over me like acid rain. I called the insurance company yesterday, Desmond continued, and his tone shifted to business-like efficiency. They said once we get the death certificate, they can have the check processed within 48 hours. Direct deposit to our account. Our account. Not my account that they'd help me manage. Not a trust for my memory. Their account, ready to receive blood money the moment my heart stopped beating. What did you tell them about the circumstances? Destiny asked, and something in her voice made my blood run cold. I said she'd been in a coma for months and the doctors weren't optimistic about her recovery, Desmond replied. They asked if we considered end-of-life care options. I told them we were consulting with medical professionals about the most humane approach. Humane approach. They were positioning my murder as mercy killing, setting up their story for the insurance investigators, creating a narrative that made them look like loving family members making difficult decisions. Did they seem suspicious at all? Destiny pressed. Not at all. They were very sympathetic. The agent even said she'd been through something similar with her own mother. She completely understood the emotional toll of watching someone suffer indefinitely. They weren't just planning to kill me. They were planning to get away with it. They'd thought through every angle, every potential question, every possible investigation. This wasn't a crime of passion or desperation. This was premeditated murder with a marketing strategy. I've been researching the doctors too, Destiny said, pulling out her phone. Dr. Martinez has a reputation for being compassionate about end-of-life decisions. Several families have written online reviews thanking him for helping them let go of loved ones with dignity. Perfect, Desmond said. We'll schedule a meeting with him tomorrow. Tell him we've been struggling with this decision, but we think it's time to discuss our options. Options. That word again. Such a clean, clinical way to discuss ending someone's life. But what I heard next made me realize they weren't just greedy, they were dangerous. What if she wakes up before we can make it happen? Destiny asked, voicing the fear that had been haunting my nightmares. What if she recovers enough to change her will or something? The silence that followed lasted forever. I could feel them both staring at my supposedly unconscious form, and I had to fight every instinct to keep my breathing perfectly steady. She won't, Desmond said finally, but his voice carried a threat that chilled me to the bone. Even if she shows signs of improvement, we'll make sure the doctors understand that we don't want any extraordinary measures taken. No additional treatments, no aggressive interventions. We'll make it clear that we want her to be comfortable, and that's all. Comfortable. Another euphemism for dead. The next day brought revelations that made their previous conversations seem almost innocent. They arrived earlier than usual, around noon, and I could tell immediately that something had changed. Their whispered urgency carried a desperation I hadn't heard before. The credit card company called again this morning, Destiny said, her voice tight with panic. They're threatening to close our account and demand full payment. $47,000, Desmond. How are we supposed to come up with $47,000? $47,000. My mind reeled trying to process that number. What could they possibly have spent that much money on? But as they continued talking, the horrifying picture began to emerge. I told you those weekend trips to Atlantic City were getting out of hand, Desmond replied, but there was no real anger in his voice. Just resignation, like a man who'd accepted his addiction long ago. Atlantic City. Gambling. My son, the boy I'd raised to be responsible with money, had been throwing away thousands of dollars at casinos while I worked 60-hour weeks to keep them afloat. Don't put this all on me, Destiny snapped back. You're the one who said we could afford the BMW lease. You said your mother would help us out if things got tight. She did help us out, Desmond said defensively. She gave us the down payment for the house, remember? And she covered our mortgage payments for 3 months last year when my business was struggling. Business struggling. That was how he described the failure that had cost me my retirement savings. I believed his story about a temporary setback, about how the investment would pay off once the market improved. Now I realize there probably never was a real business. Just more gambling, more spending, more lies to cover the endless spiral of debt. That's not enough anymore, Destiny said, and I could hear her pacing again, her heels clicking out a rhythm of desperation. The student loan people are calling too. They want $12,000 immediately or they're going to garnish your wages. And don't forget about the mortgage payment that's already 2 weeks late. 2 weeks late. They were about to lose the house I'd helped them buy, the house I'd mortgaged my own home to make possible. There's more, Desmond said quietly, and something in his tone made my blood freeze. I got a call from Tony yesterday. Tony who? Destiny asked, but her voice suggested she already knew and was afraid of the answer. Tony from the poker games downtown. I owe him $15,000 from last month's tournament. He's giving me until the end of next week to pay up or he's going to make things difficult for us. Loan sharks. My son owed money to loan sharks. The boy I'd taught to save his allowance, to work for what he wanted, to never borrow what he couldn't repay, was now in debt to criminals who would hurt him if he didn't pay. This is exactly why we need to speed things up with your mother, Destiny said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. We can't wait for nature to take its course anymore. We need that insurance money now. I know that, Desmond replied. I've been thinking about it all night. Maybe we need to be more proactive. Proactive. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. I knew exactly what he meant, and the knowledge felt like ice water flowing through my veins. What did Dr. Martinez say when you talked to him yesterday? Destiny asked. He was receptive to our concerns. I explained that we've been watching her suffer for months, that we think it's cruel to keep her trapped like this. He said he understood completely and that many families face this difficult decision. Dr. Martinez, my doctor, the man I trusted with my life, was now being manipulated into ending it. Did he say how long it would take? Destiny pressed. Once we give the go-ahead? He said it would be peaceful. Just removing the life support systems and letting her body, let nature take its course. He said most patients in her condition pass within hours once the machines are turned off. Hours. They were discussing my death in terms of hours, like scheduling a dental appointment or planning a dinner reservation. I've already contacted that grief counselor the hospital recommended, Destiny added with sickening practicality. I told her we're struggling with the decision, but we want to do what's best for Desmond's mother. She said she could meet with us tomorrow to help us process our feelings about letting her go. A grief counselor. They were building an alibi of caring family members seeking professional help to cope with their difficult decision. Every move was calculated, every conversation designed to create the appearance of loving relatives making an agonizing choice. The funeral director got back to me too, Desmond said. He said he can have everything arranged within 24 hours of the death certificate. Simple service, quick burial, minimal expense. He even offered a family discount since he knew Dad. They'd already planned my funeral. While I lay here fighting to stay alive, they'd been shopping for my casket and negotiating bulk rates for my burial. The betrayal cut so deep I almost forgot to keep breathing steadily. Perfect timing too, Destiny said. I found those flights to Paris. If we do this by Thursday, we can be on a plane by Sunday. First class, just like we always dreamed. First class tickets paid for with my death benefit. Champagne toasts funded by my life insurance. A romantic vacation purchased with my blood money. You know what the best part is? Desmond said, and I braced myself for whatever fresh horror he was about to reveal. Everyone's going to think we're heroes for making such a difficult decision. The doctors, the family, even her old friends from work. They'll all say how brave we were, how much we loved her, how hard it must have been to let her go. Heroes. They were planning to be praised for murdering me. They'd turned my death into a public relations campaign where they'd receive sympathy, admiration, and $500,000 for their performance as grieving family members. Did you ever think she might wake up? Destiny asked suddenly. Like really wake up and remember things? Question sent terror shooting through every nerve in my body. They suspected I could hear them if they realized I was aware and listening. The doctor said the chances are practically zero, Desmond replied. Even if she showed some signs of consciousness, there would likely be severe brain damage. She'd never be the same person. Honestly, it would be kinder to let her go before she has to face that reality. Kinder. Another lie wrapped in false compassion. They weren't worried about my quality of life. They were worried about my ability to expose their crimes. Still, Destiny said thoughtfully, maybe we should ask Dr. Martinez to increase her pain medication. To keep her comfortable while we're making our decision. Higher doses might help her transition more peacefully when the time comes. Higher doses. They weren't just planning to remove life support. They were planning to drug me into unconsciousness first, to make sure I couldn't wake up and fight back. As their conversation continued, planning every detail of my murder with the efficiency of corporate executives, I finally understood the complete truth. This wasn't about love or mercy or difficult family decisions. This was about money, plain and simple. Cold, calculated murder motivated by gambling debts and shopping sprees. I'd spent 2 years wondering if I'd ever truly known my son. Now I had my answer. The boy I'd raised, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, was gone. He'd been replaced by a stranger wearing his face, speaking with his voice but possessing none of his humanity. They were going to kill me. Not in some distant future when medical options ran out, but soon. This week. Before their creditors closed in, before their lies caught up with them, before I had any chance of recovery. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They assumed I was helpless, unconscious, unaware of their plans. They had no idea that their intended victim was listening to every word, planning her own survival, preparing to fight back. The game had changed completely. This was no longer about betrayal or greed or family dysfunction. This was about life and death. And I was going to make sure I wasn't the one who died. That night, as the hospital settled into its quiet evening rhythm, I made the most important decision of my life. I would not reveal my consciousness yet. Not until I had protection, evidence, and a plan that would ensure my survival. They thought they were playing chess while I was unconscious, but they were about to discover I'd been studying their every move. The risk was enormous. If they suspected I was aware, they might accelerate their timeline or find more direct methods to silence me. But staying silent and helpless meant certain death. I needed an ally, someone inside the hospital who could help me gather evidence and protect me from their schemes. That ally came in the form of Claire Henderson, the night nurse who'd been caring for me since my second week in the ICU. Claire was different from the other staff, more observant, more intuitive, and definitely more protective of her patients. I'd noticed how she lingered during family visits, how she positioned herself where she could overhear conversations, how her expression grew more troubled each time Desmond and Destiny left my room. During her Thursday night rounds, Claire was adjusting my when she leaned close to check my pupils with her penlight. In that moment, when her face was inches from mine and no cameras could capture my expression, I made my move. I allowed my eyes to track her movement ever so slightly, just enough for her to notice. Claire froze. Her hands stilled on my wrist where she'd been checking my pulse. Our eyes met for just a fraction of a second before I let mine drift closed again, returning to my unconscious performance. "Mrs. Williams," she whispered softly. "Can you hear me?" I waited. This was the crucial test. Claire was the ally I hoped she was. She would understand the danger of speaking too loudly. If she wasn't, my secret would be exposed within minutes. Claire glanced toward the door, then back at me. When she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "If you can hear me, move your right index finger just slightly." My heart pounded as I gave the tiniest movement of my finger, so small it could have been an involuntary twitch to anyone watching the monitors. Claire's intake of breath was sharp but quiet. She immediately began adjusting my blankets, creating a natural reason for being close to me while we talked. "I've been worried about you," she whispered. "Something about your family's behavior has been bothering me for weeks. Are you in danger?" Another tiny finger movement. "Yes. Do they know you can hear them?" A pause, then the slightest shake of my head. "No." Claire's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the anger beneath. "I've been a nurse for 15 years, and I've learned to recognize the signs. Your son and daughter-in-law don't behave like grieving family members. They behave like people waiting for an inheritance. If I could have smiled, I would have." Claire had seen through their performance without any help from me. "Listen carefully," she continued, still maintaining her cover of routine patient care. "I'm going to help you, but we have to be extremely careful. If they suspect you're conscious, they might try to harm you immediately. Can you continue pretending to be unconscious until we have a plan?" Another finger movement. "Yes." "Good. Here's what we're going to do. Tomorrow when they visit, I'm going to position myself where I can overhear their conversation. I want to document exactly what they're saying. The hospital has security cameras, but they don't pick up audio from this distance. We need proof of their intentions." Relief flooded through me. Finally, someone believed me without needing explanations. Someone was willing to help me fight back. "I'm also going to speak with Dr. Martinez," Claire continued. "Not directly about this situation, but I'll ask him about the family meetings they've been requesting. I want to understand what they've been telling him about your prognosis and their wishes for your care." Dr. Martinez. The man they were manipulating into becoming an accomplice to murder. If Claire could discover what lies they'd been feeding him, we might be able to prevent him from unwittingly helping them kill me. "There's something else," Claire said, her voice growing even softer. "Your daughter-in-law asked me yesterday about your pain medication levels. She wanted to know if we could increase the dosage to keep you more comfortable." That request raised red flags for me immediately. My blood turned to ice water. They weren't just planning to remove life support. They were planning to overdose me first, to make sure I couldn't wake up and expose their plot. "I told her that your current medication levels are appropriate and that any changes would need to be approved by Dr. Martinez," Claire continued. "But I'm concerned they might try to pressure him into authorizing higher doses." This was worse than I'd imagined. They weren't content to simply withdraw care and let me die slowly. They wanted to actively drug me unconscious, then remove life support while I was helpless to resist. "I need you to stay strong and keep pretending," Claire whispered. "Tomorrow I'm going to set up a recording device in your room. It's not entirely legal without family consent, but given the circumstances, I think patient safety takes priority over privacy laws. A recording device. Evidence that could expose their murder plot and save my life. But also evidence that could destroy Claire's career if we were caught." "I have to ask you this," Claire said quietly. "Are you absolutely certain about what you've been hearing? Because what you're suggesting, it would mean your own son is planning to kill you. I need to know you're sure before we take steps that could ruin innocent people's lives." Question hit me like a physical blow. Even now, even after everything I'd heard, Claire was giving me a chance to doubt myself, to believe that maybe I'd misunderstood, maybe my son wasn't capable of murder. But I thought about their laughter when they discussed my accident. I remembered Destiny's excitement about Paris trips and first-class flights. I recalled Desmond's businesslike tone when discussing funeral arrangements and insurance payouts. I heard again their cold calculation about increasing my medication to prevent any chance of recovery. I moved my finger. Yes, I was absolutely certain. Claire nodded grimly. "Then we're going to stop them. But we have to be smart about this. If we move too quickly or make mistakes, you could end up dead before we can prove anything." She was right. The evidence we gathered had to be irrefutable, The timing had to be perfect, and our plan had to account for every possible way they might try to silence me permanently. I'm going to research your legal options too, Claire said. If you can prove they're planning to kill you for inheritance money, there might be ways to change your will or medical directives to protect yourself. My will. In all my focus on gathering evidence, I hadn't considered that crucial detail. If something happened to me before we could expose them, they would still inherit everything. My death would still fund their Paris vacation and pay off their gambling debts. Get some rest, Claire whispered as she completed her rounds. Tomorrow we start building the case that will save your life. But remember, if they suspect anything, if you give them any reason to think you're conscious, they might act immediately. The risk is enormous. As Claire left my room, I felt something I hadn't experienced since waking up to their murder plot: hope. I wasn't alone anymore. I had an ally, someone who believed me and was willing to fight alongside me. But Claire was right about the risk. Desmond and Destiny discovered I was conscious. If they realized their conversations had been overheard, they wouldn't hesitate to silence me permanently. They had too much to lose and too much debt driving their desperation. The next 24 hours would determine whether I lived to expose their crimes or died as their victim. But for the first time since awakening to their betrayal, I believed I might actually have a chance to survive. The game was no longer rigged in their favor. They thought they were the only players, but now there were two of us working against them. And we were going to win. The next morning, Claire arrived for her shift with everything we needed to destroy Desmond and Destiny's murderous plans. Hidden in her uniform pocket was a small digital recording device, no bigger than a thumb drive, capable of capturing hours of crystal-clear audio. But the real genius of our plan wasn't the technology, it was the performance we were about to stage. Dr. Martinez wants to schedule a family meeting this afternoon, Claire whispered as she adjusted my forebag, speaking just loud enough for me to hear. I may have mentioned to him that your vital signs have been showing some concerning changes lately. Some concerning changes. Claire was brilliant. By suggesting my condition was deteriorating, she'd given Dr. Martinez medical justification to call the meeting Desmond and Destiny had been pushing for. They would walk into the conference room thinking their prayers had been answered, never suspecting they were walking into a trap. I've positioned the recording device inside the tissue box on the table beside your bed, Claire continued, her voice barely audible. It will pick up everything they say once they're alone with you after the meeting. But remember, you have to appear even more unresponsive than usual. Can you do that? I gave the slightest finger movement. Yes, I could do whatever it took to expose them. 2:00 that afternoon, Dr. Martinez arrived with the kind of solemn expression reserved for difficult conversations. Behind him came Desmond and Destiny, both trying to look appropriately concerned while barely containing their excitement. Please sit down, Dr. Martinez said, settling into his chair with my medical chart. I wanted to discuss some changes we've observed in your mother's condition over the past few days. I watched through barely cracked eyelids as Desmond and Destiny exchanged what they thought were subtle glances. Destiny was wearing black, as if she'd already started dressing for my funeral. What kind of changes? Desmond asked, leaning forward with an expression of concern that might have fooled someone who didn't know him as well as I did. Her brain activity has decreased significantly, Dr. Martinez explained, consulting his notes. The scans we took yesterday show less response than we've seen since she first arrived. Her vital signs have also become more irregular. None of this was true, of course. Claire had somehow convinced Dr. Martinez that my condition was worsening without actually falsifying any medical records. I didn't understand how she'd managed it, but her 15 years of experience had clearly taught her how to navigate hospital politics. What does that mean for her prognosis? Destiny asked, and I could hear the barely contained hope in her voice. I'm afraid it means we need to start having more serious conversations about end-of-life care, Dr. Martinez said gently. The likelihood of meaningful recovery has decreased substantially. At this point, we need to consider what your mother would have wanted in terms of prolonging care versus allowing natural processes to occur. natural processes. Even Dr. Martinez was using euphemisms for death, probably trying to make this conversation easier for what he believed were grieving family members. "We've been talking about this a lot," Desmond said, reaching over to take Destiny's hand in what looked like a gesture of mutual support. "It's been so hard watching her like this. She always said she wouldn't want to be kept alive artificially if there was no hope of recovery." Complete lie. I'd never said anything of the sort. In fact, after watching Thomas die so suddenly, I'd specifically told Desmond that I wanted every possible medical intervention if I was ever in a critical situation. I wanted to fight for every moment of life I could get. "She was always such a vibrant, active person," Destiny added, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. "She would hate being trapped like this, unable to live her life on her own terms." More lies. But Dr. Martinez was nodding sympathetically, clearly moved by their performance. "I understand how difficult this is for both of you," he said. "These decisions are never easy for families. What I can tell you is that if you decide to transition to comfort care only, we would remove the life support systems and focus entirely on keeping her pain-free and comfortable." "How long would that take?" Desmond asked, and I had to fight to keep my breathing steady. "I mean, how long before she finds peace?" "Every case is different," Dr. Martinez replied. "But in her current condition, it would likely be a matter of hours rather than days." Hours. They were discussing my death in terms of hours again, and Dr. Martinez was unknowingly helping them plan the timing. "We need to think about this," Destiny said, squeezing Desmond's hand. "It's such an important decision. Could we have some time alone with her to discuss it privately?" "Of course," Dr. Martinez said, standing up. "Take all the time you need. I'll be available whenever you're ready to talk about next steps." As soon as Dr. Martinez left the room, I prepared myself for the performance that would either save my life or cost me everything. I let my breathing become more shallow, allowed my face to go completely slack, and made sure every muscle in my body appeared lifeless. The moment the door closed behind the doctor, their masks came off completely. "Did you hear that?" Destiny practically squealed with excitement. "Hours, not days. We could have this wrapped up by tomorrow morning." "Keep your voice down," Desmond cautioned, but he was grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "But yeah, this is perfect timing. Better than we could have hoped for." They moved closer to my bed, and I could feel them staring down at my supposedly unconscious form. This was the moment Claire's recording device needed to capture everything. "Look at her," Destiny said, her voice dripping with disgust. "She looks absolutely pathetic. Gray skin, sunken cheeks, that awful smell of disinfectant and decay. How did she ever think this was living?" "The sooner we put her out of her misery, the better," Desmond agreed. "I can't stand seeing her like this anymore. It's depressing." Cruelty in their voices was breathtaking. They weren't even pretending to feel sadness or loss. They were discussing my appearance like I was a piece of rotting meat they couldn't wait to dispose of. "I already called the travel agent," Destiny said, pulling out her phone. "Those first-class tickets to Paris are still available. We could fly out Sunday morning and be sipping champagne at the Ritz by dinner time." "Sunday morning," Desmond repeated dreamily. 3 days after the funeral. Perfect timing for a grieving family to take a restorative trip. "I've been researching restaurants too," Destiny continued, scrolling through her phone. "There's this amazing place near the Champs-Élysées that costs $800 per person. With her life insurance money, we could eat there every night if we wanted. $800 per person." They were planning to spend more on a single dinner than most people spend on groceries in a month, and they were going to pay for it with my death benefit. "Don't forget about the house," Desmond said. "I talked to 3 different real estate agents yesterday. They all think we can get at least $400,000, maybe $450 if we stage it right and wait for the right buyer." "We should gut the whole place," Destiny said with enthusiasm. "Get rid of all her old lady furniture, update the kitchen, maybe knock down that wall between the living room and dining room. make it look modern and expensive. They were planning to destroy my home, to erase every trace of the life Thomas and I had built together. The dining room where we'd hosted Desmond's birthday parties. The living room where we'd opened Christmas presents for 26 years. All of it would be demolished to increase their profit margin. The best part is how everyone's going to praise us for making such a difficult decision, Desmond said, his voice filled with self-satisfaction. Dr. Martinez already thinks we're amazing for putting her needs first. The funeral director said he's never worked with such a caring family. We should probably cry at the funeral, Destiny suggested. Just to make it look realistic. Maybe I'll wear that black Chanel dress I bought last month. I'll look appropriately grieving but still elegant. She'd already bought an outfit for my funeral. A Chanel dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, purchased with money she'd borrowed against my life insurance policy. I can't believe we're finally going to be free, Desmond said, and I could hear him settling into the chair beside my bed. No more guilt trips about visiting. No more emergency phone calls about her health. No more pretending to care about her boring stories and complaints. Free. That's what my death meant to them. Not loss or grief or the end of our family. Freedom from the burden of having a mother who loved them. The timing really is perfect, Destiny said. Tony was getting impatient about that $15,000, and the credit card company was talking about legal action. But now we can pay everyone off and still have enough left over for the life we deserve. The life they deserved. Funded by murdering the woman who'd given them everything. They spent the next 20 minutes discussing every detail of their post-murder plans. The luxury condo in Miami they wanted to buy. The European vacation that would follow Paris. The expensive cars and designer clothes and fine dining that my death would make possible. Not once did either of them express even a moment of sadness about losing me. Not once did they mention a fond memory or acknowledge what I'd meant to their lives. I wasn't their mother anymore. I was just an asset to be liquidated, a problem to be solved, an obstacle between them and their dreams. As they finally prepared to leave, supposedly to think about the decision they'd already made, I heard Destiny say the words that would haunt me forever. Tomorrow morning, we tell Dr. Martinez we're ready to let her go. By tomorrow night, we'll be booking our flights to Paris. It's going to be the best vacation of our lives. The best vacation of their lives, purchased with my blood money. But they'd made one crucial mistake. Every word of their celebration had been captured by Claire's recording device. Every cruel comment, every greedy plan, every heartless calculation was now preserved as evidence of their murderous intentions. They thought they were about to win the game. But the trap was set, the evidence was recorded, and their victim was very much alive and ready to fight back. Tomorrow, when they returned to authorize my execution, they were going to discover that dead mothers tell no tales but living ones tell everything. The next morning arrived like Judgment Day. I'd spent the entire night rehearsing my performance, preparing for the moment when Desmond and Destiny would reveal the full extent of their cruelty to witnesses who could testify about their behavior. Claire had worked through the night too, positioning additional recording devices and ensuring that Dr. Martinez would have other medical staff present for what they believed would be my final family meeting. At exactly 10 o'clock, they arrived for what they thought would be the signing of my death warrant. Desmond wore a crisp business suit, as if he were attending an important meeting rather than authorizing his mother's execution. Destiny had chosen a designer black outfit that looked more appropriate for a cocktail party than a hospital conference room. Dr. Martinez was already waiting with two other physicians, Dr. Sarah Kim, the hospital's ethics consultant, and Dr. James Rodriguez, the head of palliative care. Claire had arranged for their presence under the pretense of ensuring proper protocol for end-of-life decisions. What they were actually there to do was witness the performance that would expose my son and daughter-in-law as callous murderers. "Thank you all for being here," Dr. Martinez began solemnly. "I know this is an incredibly difficult decision for the family, but I want to make sure we handle everything with the utmost care and compassion." "We appreciate that, Doctor," Desmond said, settling into his chair with the confidence of a man who believed he was about to inherit a fortune. My wife and I spent all night discussing this, and we've decided that it's time to let my mother go peacefully. All night discussing this. What a lie. They'd spent all night planning their Paris vacation and calculating how quickly they could liquidate my assets. I want to review the medical situation one more time, Dr. Kim interjected gently, just to ensure everyone understands the current prognosis and what removing life support would mean. Of course, doctor, Destiny replied, but I could see her checking her phone under the table. Even during the meeting where they planned to authorize my death, she couldn't be bothered to give her full attention. As Dr. Kim explained my medical condition and the procedures involved in transitioning to comfort care, I watched my son and daughter-in-law's behavior with growing amazement. They showed no signs of the emotional distress you'd expect from family members facing such a decision. Instead, Desmond kept tapping his fingers impatiently on the table, and Destiny continued glancing at her phone every few minutes. Do you have any questions about the process? Dr. Rodriguez asked compassionately. I know this information can be overwhelming for families. How long will it take? Desmond asked bluntly. I mean, once you remove the machines, how long before she passes? Clinical, business-like way he asked the question made Dr. Kim glance at Dr. Martinez with a slight frown. This wasn't how grieving sons typically inquired about their mother's final moments. Every case is different, Dr. Rodriguez replied carefully. But given her current condition, it would likely be within a few hours to perhaps a day. That soon? Destiny asked, and I caught the hint of excitement in her voice before she quickly composed herself. I mean, that's actually a relief. We wouldn't want her to suffer unnecessarily. Dr. Kim's frown deepened. Something about their responses was clearly bothering her, though she couldn't quite identify what felt wrong. I need to ask, Dr. Martinez said, have you considered any alternatives? Sometimes families benefit from a few more days to process this decision, or they want to consult with other relatives. There are no other relatives, Desmond said dismissively. It's just us, and we're in complete agreement. My mother wouldn't want to live like this. She was always very clear about not wanting to be a burden. A burden. There was that word again, and this time he'd said it in front of 3 doctors who were trained to notice family dynamics. Perhaps we should spend a few more minutes with her, Dr. Kim suggested. Sometimes family members find it helpful to have a private moment before making final arrangements. That's not necessary, Destiny said quickly. We've already said everything we needed to say. We're ready to move forward. The 3 doctors exchanged glances. In their combined decades of experience, they'd never seen family members so eager to avoid spending time with a dying loved one. Actually, I think it would be beneficial, Dr. Rodriguez said firmly. This is an irreversible decision. I'd like you both to take a few minutes alone with Mrs. Williams before we proceed with any paperwork. Desmond's jaw tightened with annoyance, but he couldn't refuse without appearing heartless. Fine. Just a few minutes, though. This is already difficult enough without prolonging it unnecessarily. The 3 doctors filed out, but I noticed Dr. Kim lingering by the door for a moment longer than necessary. Claire had positioned herself at the nurse's station directly outside my room, where she could observe everything happening inside. The moment the door closed, their facades crumbled completely. Finally, Destiny sighed, immediately pulling out her phone. I thought they'd never leave us alone. I've been getting texts from the travel agent all morning about those Paris flights. What did she say? Desmond asked, moving to stand beside my bed without even glancing at my supposedly unconscious form. The first-class tickets are still available, but only until noon today, Destiny replied, scrolling through her messages. She needs a decision within the next 2 hours. 2 hours. They were discussing vacation bookings while standing over my deathbed, with my life support machines beeping in the background. Book them, Desmond said without hesitation. By tonight, we'll have the death certificate process started, and by Sunday morning we'll be on our way to the best vacation of our lives. I also heard back from the real estate agent, Destiny continued, barely looking up from her phone. She wants to schedule the house evaluation for Monday morning. She thinks we can have it on the market by the end of the week if we're aggressive about it. Monday morning. 3 days after authorizing my death, they planned to begin selling my home. They weren't even going to wait until after my funeral to start liquidating my assets. Perfect timing, Desmond said, finally glancing down at me with an expression of cold calculation. Look at her. She's barely even breathing on her own anymore. We're doing her a favor by ending this charade. I can't believe we have to pretend to be sad about this, Destiny said, taking a selfie with her phone. Everyone's going to expect us to act devastated for weeks. It's going to be exhausting. A selfie. She was taking a selfie in my hospital room while discussing my execution. Casual cruelty was breathtaking. At least we'll be in Paris for most of the grieving period, Desmond replied. By the time we get back, people will expect us to be moving on with our lives. I've been thinking about the funeral too, Destiny said, still focused on her phone. Nothing too elaborate or expensive. Just a basic service, maybe 30 minutes max, then straight to the burial. No point wasting money on flowers and fancy caskets when we have so many other things to spend on. A basic funeral. After working myself to exhaustion to give them everything they wanted, they were planning to give me the cheapest send-off possible so they could spend more money on themselves. The important thing is that we look appropriately grief-stricken during the service, Desmond said. I've been practicing my eulogy. Something about how she lived a full life and how she's finally at peace with Dad. He'd been practicing my eulogy. While planning my murder, he'd been rehearsing the speech he'd give at my funeral, crafting lies about love and loss that would make the mourners praise him for being such a devoted son. Just remember not to smile when they hand us the life insurance check, Destiny laughed. That would really blow our cover. They both found this hilarious, laughing at the thought of trying to contain their excitement when they received my death benefit. Their laughter echoed off the sterile hospital walls while my life support machines continued their steady rhythm. You know what the best part is going to be? Desmond said, moving even closer to my bed. Finally, we can live our real lives without this burden dragging us down. No more guilt trips about visiting. No more emergency phone calls about her health problems. No more pretending to care about her boring stories and constant complaints. And no more of her disapproving looks every time we buy something nice for ourselves, Destiny added. She always acted like we should feel guilty for wanting to enjoy life. Well, now we can enjoy life without her judgment. There it was. The breaking point that revealed everything about who they really were. I wasn't their mother anymore. I wasn't even a person to them. I was just a burden they couldn't wait to eliminate, an obstacle standing between them and the life they felt entitled to live. Finally, we can live our real lives without this burden, Desmond repeated, staring down at my motionless form with something that looked almost like hatred. Outside the door, I could see Dr. Kim and Dr. Rodriguez returning, their expressions troubled by whatever they'd observed during their brief absence. Claire was positioning herself to escort them back into the room, and I could see the recording devices she'd hidden were still capturing every word. But more importantly, I could see that the 3 medical professionals were beginning to understand what they were dealing with. The lack of grief, the impatience, the coldly transactional discussions, everything was adding up to a picture that looked nothing like a loving family making a difficult decision. Desmond and Destiny had no idea that their performance was being evaluated by trained professionals who'd seen real grief thousands of times. They thought they were fooling everyone, but their mask had slipped so far that even strangers could see the truth. Trap was working perfectly. In their eagerness to claim their inheritance, they'd revealed themselves to be exactly what they were, heartless, greedy murderers who saw killing me as nothing more than a business transaction. Soon, very soon, they were going to discover that their intended victim had heard every word, recorded every confession, and was very much alive and ready to fight back. The game was almost over, and they were about to lose everything. 20 minutes later, the doctors returned with the paperwork that would have been my death warrant. Dr. Martinez carried a clipboard with the end-of-life care authorization forms, while Dr. Kim and Dr. Rodriguez flanked him with expressions that had grown noticeably more skeptical during their brief absence. Claire had also returned, but she wasn't alone. Behind her were three people I hadn't expected to see: Patrick Williams, Thomas's brother and one of the few relatives who'd stayed in touch, Olivia Martinez, my former co-worker who'd visited me twice since the accident, and Thomas Chen, the family lawyer who'd handled our wills and estate planning. Desmond and Destiny barely glanced at the additional witnesses, too focused on the paperwork that represented their pathway to wealth. "We just need signatures here," Dr. Martinez said, placing the clipboard on the table. "This authorizes us to discontinue life support and transition Mrs. Williams to comfort care only." "Of course, Doctor," Desmond said, reaching eagerly for the pen. "We appreciate everything you've done for my mother. This is what she would have wanted." "Actually," Dr. Kim interrupted, "before we proceed, I'd like to ask a few more questions about your mother's previous wishes regarding end-of-life care. Did she ever explicitly discuss these scenarios with you?" Desmond's hand froze over the paperwork. "Well, not in specific detail, but she always said she wouldn't want to be kept alive artificially." "That's interesting," Thomas Chen said, stepping forward with a briefcase. "Because according to the advance directive Mrs. Williams filed with my office 2 years ago, she specifically requested that all possible medical interventions be used to preserve her life in any emergency situation." The blood drained from Destiny's face. "Who are you? Why are you here?" "I'm Thomas Chen, the Williams family attorney," he replied calmly. "And I'm here because Nurse Henderson contacted me with some very concerning information about this family's behavior and intentions." This was the moment. Everything Claire and I had planned for was culminating in this single perfect instant. Desmond was still holding the pen, Destiny was staring at the lawyer in horror, and the three doctors were watching with growing understanding. And that's when I opened my eyes. "Surprised to see me awake, son?" The reaction was instantaneous and devastating. Desmond dropped the pen as if it had burst into flames. Destiny let out a strangled gasp and stumbled backward, her chair crashing to the floor. Both of them stared at me with expressions of pure terror, as if they were seeing a ghost rise from the grave. "Mrs. Williams!" Dr. Martinez exclaimed, immediately moving to check my vital signs. "How long have you been conscious? Can you tell me your name and where you are?" "My name is Kendra Williams," I said clearly, sitting up in bed with strength I'd been hiding for days. "I'm in City General Hospital and I've been awake for over a week, listening to my son and his wife plan my murder." "That's impossible," Desmond stammered, his face white as hospital sheets. "You've been in a coma for 2 months. The doctors said there was no brain activity." "The doctors said no such thing," Dr. Kim corrected firmly. "Your mother's brain scans have always shown normal activity. We never told you otherwise." I looked directly at Desmond, then at Destiny, savoring the moment of absolute terror in their eyes. "I heard everything. Every conversation about life insurance and house sales. Every detail about your gambling debts and loan shark threats. Every cruel word about Paris vacations and first-class flights paid for with my death money." "You're confused," Destiny said desperately. "You've been unconscious. You're having some kind of hallucination from the medications." "Am I?" I asked, nodding to Claire, who stepped forward with a small digital device. "Then perhaps you can explain these recordings." Claire pressed play, and the room filled with their voices from the previous day. "Hours, not days. We could have this wrapped up by tomorrow morning. Those first-class tickets to Paris are still available, but only until noon today. Finally, we can live our real lives without this burden dragging us down." The recordings continued for several minutes, capturing every damning word they'd spoken while they thought I was unconscious. Their voices discussing my death like a business transaction, planning vacations with my insurance money, mocking my appearance, laughing about having to pretend grief at my funeral. Desmond and Destiny stood frozen, watching their own words condemn them in front of multiple witnesses. "There's more," Thomas Chin said, opening his briefcase. Nurse Henderson also documented several instances where Mrs. Williams' family members requested increases in her pain medication that could have rendered her permanently unconscious or worse. "Dr. Martinez, were you aware of these requests?" Dr. Martinez's expression darkened. "I was told the family was concerned about their mother's comfort levels. I had no idea there might be ulterior motives. We also have financial records," Patrick Williams said, stepping forward with his own folder of documents. "Kendra asked me to investigate her son's debts after she regained consciousness. Desmond owes $47,000 in credit card debt, $12,000 in defaulted student loans, and $15,000 to known gambling establishments. The family is facing bankruptcy within 30 days. This gives them clear financial motivation for wanting Mrs. Williams dead," Thomas Chen added. "Her life insurance policy is worth $500,000, and her house is valued at approximately $400,000. Her death would have solved all their financial problems immediately." Dr. Rodriguez had been quietly observing everything with the trained eye of someone who'd seen family dynamics in crisis situations. "I need to ask directly," he said. "Mrs. Williams, do you believe your son and daughter-in-law were planning to kill you for your inheritance?" "I don't believe it, doctor," I replied clearly. "I know it. They discussed timing my death to coincide with their vacation plans. They researched how to pressure you into authorizing my execution. They even planned what to wear to my funeral to look appropriately grieving while hiding their excitement about the inheritance." Olivia Martinez stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Kendra, I'm so sorry. I had no idea Desmond had become this kind of person. Your son used to be such a sweet boy. The boy I raised is gone," I said sadly. "He's been replaced by someone I don't recognize. Someone capable of murder for money. This is insane," Destiny shrieked, finally finding her voice. "You can't prove any of this. Those recordings could be fake. You're all conspiring against us." Claire stepped forward with a second device. "These are the recordings from this morning's conversation, Mrs. Williams. Would you like me to play the part where your husband discussed booking first-class flights to Paris while standing over what he thought was your deathbed?" "No need," I said, never taking my eyes off Desmond's horrified face. "I remember every word. I remember you laughing about having to pretend to be sad at my funeral. I remember you calling me a burden you couldn't wait to eliminate. I remember you practicing your eulogy while planning my murder." "We weren't planning murder," Desmond protested desperately. We thought you were suffering. We wanted to end your pain. The only pain you wanted to end was the inconvenience of having a living mother," I replied. "You wanted to end the obstacle standing between you and my money." Dr. Kim looked at the other physicians. "I think we need to contact hospital security and possibly the police. This situation is far beyond medical ethics now." "Already done," Claire said. "I contacted the authorities as soon as we confirmed Mrs. Williams' allegations. Detective Rashad should be here within minutes." "Detective," Destiny whispered, the last of her color draining away. "You called the police?" "Attempted murder is a serious crime," Thomas Chin said. "Conspiracy to commit murder for financial gain carries a sentence of 25 years to life in this state." The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of my heart monitor, which was registering perfectly normal vital signs. No longer the irregular patterns of a dying woman, but the strong, steady rhythm of someone very much alive and ready to fight. Desmond collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands. Destiny was backing toward the door, probably calculating whether she could somehow escape before the police arrived. "There's nowhere to run," I said quietly. "And no lies left to tell. Everyone in this room has heard the truth. Everyone knows what you planned to do to me." "We loved you," Desmond said weakly, still not meeting my eyes. "We never wanted to hurt you. "If this is love," I replied, "then I'm grateful to discover the truth before it killed me." The sound of footsteps in the hallway announced Detective Rashad's arrival. Soon, very soon, Desmond and Destiny would be facing criminal charges for attempted murder. Their Paris vacation would be replaced with jail cells. Their dreams of luxury would become nightmares of consequence. But more than their punishment, more than their legal troubles, what mattered most was this: I had survived. I had fought back. And I had won. The resurrection was complete. The dead mother had returned to life, and her testimony would ensure that her would-be murderers faced justice for their crimes. 4 months later, I stood in the courthouse steps, breathing in the fresh air of complete freedom. Detective Rashad had just informed me that Desmond and Destiny had accepted plea agreements, 15 years each for conspiracy to commit murder for financial gain. No parole eligibility for the first 10 years. The legal consequences had been swift and thorough. Within hours of their arrest that day in the hospital, Thomas Chen had helped me file an emergency restraining order preventing them from coming within 500 feet of me or my property. By the end of that week, I'd completely rewritten my will, leaving everything to the charities and people who'd shown me real love during my darkest hours. The house that Desmond and Destiny had planned to gut and sell was now designated to become a shelter for elderly abuse victims. My life insurance policy, the one they'd been so eager to claim, would fund a foundation dedicated to helping families recognize and report elder abuse. Even in my death, whenever that naturally occurred, they would receive nothing while my resources would help protect other vulnerable people. But the legal justice, satisfying as it was, couldn't heal the deeper wounds. The knowledge that my own son had been willing to murder me for money was a betrayal that cut deeper than any physical injury. There were nights during my recovery when I'd lie awake wondering if I'd somehow failed as a mother, if there had been signs I'd missed, moments where I could have changed the trajectory of his life. Claire, who'd become far more than just my nurse, helped me work through those dark thoughts during my rehabilitation. She'd taken vacation days to drive me to physical therapy appointments, brought me home-cooked meals when I was too weak to prepare my own food, and listened patiently as I processed the grief of losing a son who was still alive but dead to me emotionally. "You didn't create monsters," she told me one evening as we sat on my front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of hope. "You created a loving environment where a child should have learned kindness and gratitude. What he chose to do with those lessons was his decision, not your failure." Patrick Williams, Thomas's brother, had also become an unexpected pillar of support. He'd helped me navigate the legal proceedings, accompanied me to court hearings when I was still using a walker, and slowly helped me understand what real family support looked like. Unlike Desmond, Patrick never asked for anything in return for his help. He simply showed up, day after day, proving that blood relationships meant nothing compared to genuine care. "Your brother would be so proud of how you handled this," Patrick told me during one of our weekly dinners. "Thomas always said you were stronger than you knew. He'd be amazed to see how right he was." Olivia Martinez had organized a support group of my former co-workers, friends, and neighbors who'd rallied around me during my recovery. These were people who'd known me for years, who'd shared holidays and celebrations, who'd grieved with me when Thomas died. They'd created a chosen family that provided everything Desmond and Destiny had failed to offer: genuine love without conditions or expectations. The hardest decision had been what to do about forgiveness. Well-meaning friends kept asking if I planned to reconcile with Desmond and Destiny, if I would visit them in prison, if I could find it in my heart to forgive them. The questions felt like additional wounds, suggesting that somehow I was lacking in compassion if I couldn't embrace the people who tried to murder me. But forgiveness, I learned, didn't require reconciliation. I could release the anger and hatred that would have poisoned my remaining years without welcoming my would-be killers back into my life. I could wish them well in prison without endangering my own safety and peace. Forgiveness was something I did for myself, not for them. The most meaningful part of my new life was the work I'd begun with the Elder Abuse Prevention Foundation. Using my own experience and the evidence that had saved my life, I'd started speaking to groups about recognizing the warning signs of financial abuse and murder plots within families. Presentations were difficult emotionally, but they were also healing, turning my trauma into a tool that could protect other vulnerable people. If your family members are more interested in your assets than your recovery, I would tell audiences of seniors and their caregivers, if they push for medical decisions that benefit them financially, if they show no genuine grief about your condition, those are red flags that require immediate professional intervention. The foundation had already helped uncover 3 similar cases in our state, situations where adult children were pressuring doctors to withdraw care from parents who could have recovered. My story had become a cautionary tale that was literally saving lives. Dr. Martinez had become an advocate for the foundation as well, using my case to train other physicians about recognizing suspicious family behavior. He'd implemented new protocols at the hospital requiring ethics consultations and multiple physician approval for any end-of-life decisions, especially when substantial inheritances were involved. "Your case changed how we approach these situations," he told me during a recent visit. "We're much more careful now about verifying that families are acting in the patient's best interests rather than their own financial interests." Claire had eventually left her position at the hospital to work full-time for the foundation, managing the day-to-day operations while I focused on public speaking and policy advocacy. Our professional relationship had evolved into the deepest friendship of my life, built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the unshakable bond of having survived something terrible together. "You know what I've learned?" I told her as we prepared for another presentation to a group of social workers. "Family isn't always about blood relationships. It's about people who show up when you need them, who protect you when you're vulnerable, who celebrate your victories and mourn your losses alongside you." The audience for today's presentation was larger than usual. Over 200 social workers, nurses, and family counselors who worked with elderly clients. As I stepped up to the podium, I thought about how different my life looked now compared to 6 months ago when I'd been lying in that hospital bed listening to murder plans. I was stronger physically than I'd been in years, thanks to physical therapy and the motivation that came from having a purpose beyond mere survival. I was surrounded by people who genuinely cared about my well-being without expecting anything in return. I was using my experience to protect other people from the betrayal I'd endured. Most importantly, I was free. Free from the exhausting cycle of giving everything to people who saw me only as a resource to exploit. Free from the guilt of never being enough for family members whose love came with conditions and expectations. Free to build relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection. As I concluded my presentation that day, I looked out at the faces in the audience, professionals dedicated to protecting vulnerable people, individuals who'd chosen careers in service to others, people who understood that real family was about care and commitment rather than blood and obligation. If you're listening to this story and recognize similar patterns in your own family relationships, I said, please remember this: you deserve better. Your worth isn't measured by others' greed or selfishness. Real love doesn't come with conditions or expiration dates based on your usefulness. The applause that followed was warm and sustained, but more importantly, several people approached me afterward to share their own stories of family betrayal and recovery. Each conversation reminded me that my survival had meaning beyond my own life. It had become a beacon of hope for others trapped in similar situations. That evening, as Claire and I drove home past the hospital where my nightmare had begun, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete contentment. Not happiness exactly, because the scars from Desmond and Destiny's betrayal would always remain. But contentment in knowing that I'd not only survived their attempt to murder me, I'd transformed the experience into something that could help protect other people. "Any regrets?" Claire asked as we pulled into my driveway. I thought about the question seriously. Did I regret the years I'd spent sacrificing everything for a son who'd seen me only as an obstacle to his dreams? Did I regret trusting people who'd been planning my death? Did I regret the naive belief that unconditional love would always be reciprocated? No regrets, I said finally. Everything that happened led me to this moment, to this life, to this family I've chosen and who've chosen me. I wouldn't change any of it because changing it might mean losing what I have now. As we walked up the front steps of my home, the house that would someday become a sanctuary for other abuse survivors, I realized that sometimes the greatest victories come not from avoiding betrayal, but from surviving it and using that survival to build something better. My son had tried to kill me for my money. Instead, he'd given me a reason to truly live. And that, more than any legal justice or financial security, was the sweetest victory of all. Did you like my story? And what city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. Give us a like if you enjoyed this story. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. By the way, don't forget to subscribe. It encourages me to keep bringing more stories like this. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.